On a single night in April of 2021, 22 kings and queens of ancient Egypt rode through the streets of Cairo in golden vehicles, with an orchestra singing in a language 3,000 years old. The whole country stopped to watch, and so did much of the world. This building is where that procession was headed. It is called the National Museum of Egyptian Civilization, and we are walking in exactly 4 years later to the day. So come along, because the story of how those royals got here is one of the strangest journeys in the history of museums. First, let us get our bearings. We are in Cairo, the capital of Egypt on the African continent, where the Nile River finishes its long run north toward the Mediterranean Sea. The museum sits in a district called Fustat in Old Cairo, on the southern side of the modern city. It overlooks a small lake called Ain el-Sira, whose name comes from the Arabic word for a spring. Downtown Cairo and Tahrir Square, where these royal mummies used to live, sit about 3 miles to the north. The idea behind this place is bigger than any single dynasty. Most museums in Egypt focus on the pharaohs because the pharaohs are what the world comes to see. This one was built to tell the whole story of Egyptian civilization, from prehistoric times all the way to the modern era, as one continuous thread. Its galleries run through the archaic, Pharaonic, Greco-Roman, Coptic, Islamic, and modern periods without a break. Around 50,000 artifacts were gathered here from institutions all over the country to make that argument, and UNESCO provided technical help to pull it off. The neighborhood outside these walls has its own claim to history. Fustat was founded in the year 641 by Amr ibn al-As, the commander who brought Islam to Egypt. Legend says a dove laid an egg in his tent before he marched on Alexandria, and he took it as a sign to build his city on that spot. The very name Fustat comes from the word for tent. His army camp became the first capital of Islamic Egypt, and its mosque, built the following year, was the first mosque ever raised in Egypt. The main gallery here is arranged so that you walk through time in order. Stone tools give way to pottery, pottery gives way to statues and gold gives way to Coptic textiles and Islamic woodwork. It is a simple trick, but it changes how you see the objects. A carved chair from the Pharaohs and a carved door from medieval Cairo stop being separate stories and start feeling like chapters of one long book. Very few museums anywhere attempt to sweep this wide under one roof. And medieval Fustat deserves its chapter, because for a while it was one of the wealthiest cities on Earth. Between roughly 975 and 1075, its markets handled goods from as far away as Spain, China, and Vietnam. Its workshops were famous for ceramics, pottery, and glass, and by the 12th century, some 200,000 people lived here. This was the commercial heart of Egypt for about 5 centuries. The museum now stands almost on top of that buried boomtown. Take a moment with the smaller objects as we pass, because they carry the quietest and best stories. Combs, sandals, cooking pots, children's toys, and written scraps of everyday business. Egypt's dry climate preserves things that rot away almost everywhere else on the planet. That is why this country's museums can show you not just what ancient people worshipped, but what they wore, what they ate, and what they complained about. 5,000 years of ordinary life, still holding its shape. Fustat'S Golden Age ended in smoke. In the year 1168, with a crusader army under King Amalric marching on Egypt, the vizier Shawar made a desperate choice. Rather than let the wealthy city fall into enemy hands, he ordered Fustat burned. The fire raged for 54 days and devastated the city that had taken 5 centuries to build. Cairo, its younger neighbor to the north, took over as the capital, and Fustat never fully recovered. Its ruins slept under debris for 800 years, which is exactly why archaeologists love this ground today. The museum itself took decades to become real. The building was designed by the Egyptian architect El Ghazali Kasbah, with UNESCO lending technical support to the project. It opened partially in 2017, showing a first slice of its collection while work continued. Then on April 3, 2021, it was officially inaugurated on live television, with a ceremony Egypt had never attempted before. Instead of cutting a ribbon, they threw a parade for 22 dead monarchs. Seen from above, the setting explains itself. The museum rises beside the Ain el-Sira lake with the minarets and church towers of Old Cairo beyond it, and the modern city stretching to the horizon. The site puts prehistory, pharaohs, early Christianity, and early Islam within a short walk of one another. That is the whole thesis of the museum expressed in geography. In 2022, the land around the lake was redeveloped from rundown housing into a landscape tourist site, tying the building to the water. So why move royal mummies across a city at all? For more than a century, Egypt's greatest kings and queens lay in the old Egyptian Museum on Tahrir Square, in rooms that were showing their age. The new museum offered a purpose-built home with modern climate control and a gallery designed for quiet respect rather than crowds shuffling past. But you do not simply put Ramesses II in a delivery truck. The transfer became a state occasion called the Pharaohs' Golden Parade, and Egypt turned it into one of the great television events of the decade. On the evening of April 3, 2021, 22 mummies left Tahrir Square in procession. 18 were kings and 4 were queens, all from the era historians call the New Kingdom and the dynasties around it. Each rode in a specially built vehicle decorated in gold and black, with the royal name displayed on the side. The route ran about 3 miles through streets emptied by security because Egyptians were asked to watch from home. Tens of millions did, on every major channel in the country, while news agencies carried it around the planet. Think about the engineering problem for a moment. These are bodies more than 3,000 years old, preserved skin and bone that could be damaged by a hard bump or a change in the air. Moving them even 3 miles was a conservation project disguised as a celebration. The planners treated each mummy the way an art museum treats a fragile masterpiece, except this masterpiece was once a living head of state. Egypt had one chance to get it right on live television. The solution was to seal each mummy inside a special container filled with nitrogen, an atmosphere that protects ancient tissue from decay during the journey. The containers rode in vehicles prepared to cushion the fragile cargo through every turn of the route. Nothing was left to improvisation, and the parade rolled at a slow ceremonial pace from one museum to the other. It worked. All 22 royals arrived without harm, and conservators settled them into their new hall. The procession itself was arranged with a historian's care. The vehicles traveled in chronological order of reign, beginning with Seqenenre-Tao of the 17th dynasty and ending with Ramesses IX. An orchestra performed music written for the occasion, with singers chanting texts in the ancient Egyptian language itself. When the convoy reached this museum, the president of Egypt received it in person, and the Republican Guard fired a 21-gun salute. Cannons for kings who had been dead for 3,000 years. Somewhere below the main gallery, those 22 royals now rest in the Royal Mummies Hall. It is kept dim and hushed, closer in feeling to a royal tomb than to an exhibit, and cameras stay outside, which is why we will let words carry this part. What you meet down there is not gold or granite. It is faces. Actual human faces of the people whose names cover every temple wall in Egypt. So let us meet a few of them properly. The procession began with Seqenenre-Tao for a reason, because his story starts Egypt's great comeback. Around 1555 BC, he ruled only the region of Thebes, while foreign kings called the Hyksos held the north. Seqenenre went to war against them, and his mummy shows how that ended. His skull carries terrible wounds from an axe and blades that match Hyksos weapons of the period. A CT scan study published in 2021 found he died in his 40s, possibly on the battlefield, with damaged hands suggesting they may have been bound. Egyptians remember him as the brave. His death lit a fuse. His son Camels carried the war north, and his younger son Amos finished it, driving out the Hyksos and reuniting Egypt under one crown. Amos founded the 18th dynasty, which opened the new kingdom, the age of Egypt's greatest wealth and power. Nearly every famous name in the Mummies Hall descends from that fight. Hatshepsut, Thutmose III, Amenhotep III, and the Ramesses kings all stand on the shoulders of the wounded man in the first vehicle of the parade. Here is the question that should be nagging you. How did 22 royal bodies survive 3,000 years when nearly every royal tomb in Egypt was robbed? The answer is that ancient priests saw the robbery coming. Late in the New Kingdom, tomb raiding grew so bad that the priests of the 21st dynasty quietly gathered the great pharaohs from their tombs. They rewrapped them, labeled them, and hid them together in secret caches in the cliffs of Thebes. Then the locations were simply forgot for nearly 3,000 years. Around 1871, a local family named Abd el-Rashal found one of those hiding places, a tomb shaft near Deir el-Bahari now catalogued as TT 320. They kept the discovery secret for about a decade, quietly selling small pieces from it. But funeral papyri and jars kept surfacing on the antiquities market in Luxor, and officials began to suspect an undiscovered royal source. After a quarrel inside the family, the secret came out in 1881. What waited in that shaft was beyond anything the authorities imagined. On July 6, 1881, the museum official Emile Brugsch was lowered into the shaft. Inside lay more than 50 kings, queens, and royal family members, including Ahmose I, Thutmose III, Seti I, and Ramesses II himself. Fearing looters, Brugsch had the entire tomb emptied within 48 hours, an astonishing pace by any archaeological standard. The mummies were carried out of the cliffs and shipped down the Nile to Cairo. They have been in the capital's museums ever since, and this hall is their fourth and finest home. It is worth pausing on how strange and wonderful this is. We can stand a few steps from the actual body of a person who ruled the ancient world. No other civilization offers that so completely. Rome's emperors are dust, and the kings of Babylon are names on clay. Egypt alone preserved its rulers so well that modern scientists can scan their bones, study their diseases, and count their battle scars. The Mummies Hall is the closest thing history has to a room full of eyewitnesses. The most famous eyewitness is Ramesses II, called Ramesses the Great. He ruled for 66 years and 74 days in the 13th century BC, outliving many of his own children, and was probably around 90 when he died. Forensic study of his mummy found something unexpected: slightly wavy red hair, evidence that the great king came from a family of redheads. He built more temples and raised more statues than perhaps any pharaoh before or after. And in modern times, he became the only pharaoh to make a state visit abroad. In 1976, conservators grew alarmed at the condition of his mummy and flew him to France for treatment. When the aircraft landed at Le Bourget Airport near Paris, Ramesses was received with full military honors, the welcome befitting a king. French scientists treated the mummy and returned him to Egypt restored. A story spread later that Egypt had issued him an actual passport, and while that detail is a myth, the honors on the tarmac were entirely real. 3,000 years after his death, a European republic still met him as a head of state. Four of the 22 royals in the parade were women, and their stories are some of the best in the building. Ancient Egypt was unusual in how much power a royal woman could hold. A queen could rule as regent, steer the government, and in rare cases take the throne outright with the full titles of a king. The parade carried Ahmose Nefertari, Meritamun, Tiye, and one woman who outruled most of the men in the hall. Her name was Hatshepsut. Hatshepsut took the throne of Egypt in the 15th century BC and ruled as pharaoh for about 2 decades. one of the most successful reigns of the entire New Kingdom. She sent trade expeditions south to the land of Punt and built one of the most beautiful temples in Egypt at Deir el-Bahari, in the same cliffs that later hid the royal cache. After her death, her successor tried to erase her name from the monuments. He failed. Her mummy rode through Cairo in 2021, with her name in lights on the side of the vehicle. Then there is Tiye, a commoner's daughter who married Amenhotep III and became one of the most influential women of her age. Foreign kings wrote to her directly, which tells you how much weight her word carried in matters of state. She was the grandmother of Tutankhamun, whose golden treasures made Egypt world famous all over again in the 1920s. Tutankhamun himself is not in this hall, since he still rests in his tomb in the Valley of the Kings. But his grandmother made the golden ride across Cairo. Back upstairs, the museum keeps its promise that Egypt did not end with the pharaohs. The galleries carry you through Greek and Roman rule, through early Christianity, and into the Islamic centuries that built the Cairo we walked through to get here. You see the same crafts passed hand to hand across religions and empires. Weaving, woodwork, pottery, and glass, each one a thread running unbroken from the Pyramid Age to the present. That continuity is the museum's real treasure, and almost no one else tells it. One gallery makes the point better than any other, the Textile Hall, with around 600 artifacts tracing Egyptian cloth through the ages. Egypt was the linen maker of the ancient world, and its weavers never stopped. The museum grounds even preserve a dye house from the Fatimid era, a genuine medieval industrial workshop surviving beside a 21st century museum. Pharaonic linen, Coptic tapestry, and Islamic embroidery hang in one continuous story. It is 5,000 years of people making beautiful cloth on the same stretch of river. Before we finish, look toward the water. During the Golden Parade, Egyptian funerary boats were built for the occasion and displayed on the lake in front of the museum, echoing the vessels that once carried royal dead across the Nile. Ancient Egyptians believed the sun itself traveled by boat, and kings were buried with boats for the journey beyond. So the staging was not decoration, it was theology. The redeveloped lakefront now frames the museum the way the Nile once framed the tombs. So what is the National Museum of Egyptian Civilization? It is a museum built on the ashes of Egypt's first Islamic capital, holding the bodies of the kings who built its most ancient one. It is 50,000 objects arguing that 7,000 years of history belong to a single story. And it is the ending point of the strangest commute in the world, the night 22 pharaohs crossed Cairo to a 21-gun salute. Museums preserve things. This one, on the right afternoon, feels more like a royal court still in session. If you ever get one afternoon in Cairo beyond the pyramids, consider spending it here in Fustat, where the whole sweep of Egypt sits under one roof beside a spring-fed lake. Walk the long gallery, pay your respects in the Mummies Hall, and give the old dye house a look on your way out. History does not get more complete than this in any one building on Earth. Thank you for watching. Follow for more of the trails of the world.